Good evening. Good evening. So our democracy may be in peril, but tonight we celebrate Victor S. Navasky and the interns he has spread around this country and the world. Welcome, welcome. I think there are people in this room who would agree with me that the Nation internship, the Victor S. Navasky internship, changed their life. And there are many who are here tonight who would agree. There are about 1,000 or more interns now as a result of the program. As a result, there are a fair number of Pulitzer Prize winners, but as Victor once described, it's kind of a guerrilla network and a troublemaking network that Victor inspired. But from the New York Times to El País, from the Washington Post to Democracy Now! Fair, you're going to hear from Laila, Al-Arian, one of our great interns. She just ticks off where her class is. Don Guttenplan said my class, I don't know. Anyway, but, so I embarked on my political journalistic, more than that, boot camp education at the Nation. It led to a real job a few years later as assistant editor. There are people here who, there were some weddings, there were some affairs, there's some great friendships. Now, in the Nation spirit, we don't name names. But I do want to thank Victor. I do want to thank Victor and Annie, and I forgot to mention this at their wedding anniversary party years ago. Thank you for giving me cover, and I won't say more than that. I started my internship at the Nation, and I was, I guess you say, personing or manning the teletype, which I guess Kai Bird was using to file from the Middle East. I remember when the fax machine arrived, the interns were very excited. But more important, I just started in the fall of 1980, when Victor asked me to come to his office to meet the widow of the Nation's former editor, Carrie McWilliams. Iris McWilliams needed someone to help organize her late husband's papers, and Victor thought I'd be the right person. I was finishing my thesis on the McCarthy era, and in my intern application, I'd explained that I wanted to work at a magazine which fought so courageously for civil liberties during those scoundrel times. I considered McWilliams and Victor, whose magisterial book naming names drew me to the Nation, lead watchmen during and after those dark nights. Years later, I came to understand how unusual a mentor Victor was. He was a true believer in independence of journals, of countries, and of those who sought his mentorship. He trusted you to make up your own mind, and he wasn't in the business of imposing linear or nonlinear advice. Maybe that's because one of his mentors was the esteemed kibitzing philosopher, Sidney Morgenbesser, who, when asked if he disagreed with Chairman Mao's saying that a proposition can be true or false at the same time, Morgenbesser replied, "I do and I don't." Victor taught me to sharpen skills necessary for editing a magazine as tempestuous in its politics, personalities as the Nation. I once described Victor as velvet steel. There's his charming, genial temperament, but there's also the steeliness at the core, which I have a great affection for, but it can't be ignored. If you want to see both sides on display, ask Victor about Alger Hiss. Or watch him at the blackjack table on the Nation cruise, which he founded, and you wonder what's going on with the proceeds. And he's wearing black tie. But Victor's also that rare person who's so fierce in his convictions and kind and compassionate and generous in his personal relations. He's also remarkably responsive, accessible, patient, self-deprecating, doesn't let petty matters get to him, and laughs easily. Victor, I still need mentoring on those last two, how to be better at those last two. Let me finish by, over the years, I've gathered a small file of my correspondence with Victor. These are emails, scrawled handwritten notes on yellow legal pads, Sketches, he's a great sketcher. And notes on napkins. One of the emails goes like this: Katrina, don't despair. No advice. I think what you're doing is right. Well, I have no memory of what I was despairing of. I do know that the message captures Victor's inimitable approach to mentorship, and I am deeply grateful tonight to the internship program, to those I've worked with, to Victor. Thank you. Onwards, onwards. I want to briefly introduce Aaron O'Mara, who was president of the Nation, what a title, 2016 to 21, and is now heading the fund, the Nation Fund for Independent Journalism. Aaron, on the screen.
Thank you, Katrina, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to Zoom in and participate in this incredible celebration. Victor, I wish you a very happy birthday, and I hope you enjoy every moment of this night. I want you to know the Victor S. Navasky internship you launched over 4 decades ago and all of the educational programs seeded by the Nation are in great hands with the Nation Fund for Independent Journalism. Along with the editorial internship, we support a publishing internship to teach the vitally important business of media. We also sponsor Student Nation, which was founded to give student journalists the space to speak for themselves, and each year we publish over 100 pieces of student content through this program. Student Nation often surfaces policies and ideas that are ahead of their time. Think student debt cancellation and fossil fuel divestment. And this year, we're excited to be publishing a book that looks back and amplifies this incredible student work. The Puffin Nation Student Journalism Conference introduces student journalists from all over the world to professionals working in the field for discussion, brainstorming, and networking. And the Puffin Fellowships enable us to find and mentor aspiring journalists. We are deeply grateful to the Puffin Foundation for their partnership and generous support. We're also grateful to our sponsors for this evening, PEN America and the Nation Wine Club. There's so much more to share. Everything from sending an alum of these programs to cover an historic conference, to thought-provoking public events, to developing a new program to give high school students from underserved communities a viable path to a career in journalism. There's just not enough time to share it all. I know all of you join me in the belief that independent journalism has the capacity to bring about a more democratic and equitable world. The Nation Fund for Independent Journalism is committed to the future and excellence of independent press, and we're proud to expand opportunities for diverse voices and perspectives and educate early career journalists. Victor, again, happy birthday. Thank you to everyone for being here and supporting our mission, and I wish you all an incredible night.
Thank you, Aaron. So the next person needs no introduction. You will see him tomorrow on TV, Jamie Raskin. Jamie is a peaceful warrior for justice and for democracy. And for tonight, it's worth knowing that 3 generations of Raskins, Mark, who was on the editorial board under Victor, Jamie, who has contributed for 40 years to the Nation, and his son Tommy, who contributed to the 150th anniversary issue. They're family. So over to Jamie. Thank you.
Hello, Katrina, and hello to the whole Nation family and everybody assembled at the New York Society for Ethical Culture to celebrate Victor Navasky. Happy birthday, Victor. What an extraordinary and happy occasion this is to be observing your 90th birthday with lovers of the Nation and your friends from across America. I wish I could be there with you, but I am stuck down in the Nation's capital. I want to salute the Nation for working to expand the Navasky editorial internship. I know that this birthday party is just a pretext for building the Navasky interns, but it does give us an opportunity, Victor, to tell you how much we love you. And you play a very special role in the life of my whole family. And, You were very beloved by my dad and by my mom, by Marcus and Barbara, and by my wife Sarah, and by all three of our kids, Hannah, Tommy, and Tabitha, who have all loved you and who consider you a great leader. So forgive me there. I missed a call from the speaker. But in any event, Victor, thank you for the extraordinary lifetime of devotion that you have demonstrated to the nation and also the nation and the world. And we know it's just the start for you. And you have such a proud career to look back on, but I think an even prouder career to look ahead to. And we just want to let you know that we cherish you for everything that you've done for all of us. So hang tough for America, everybody, and happy birthday to Vic.
Hello, my name is Randy Kennedy, and I'm here to celebrate with everyone. I'm a very lucky person, and one of the reasons why I'm so lucky is because I've had the great good fortune of being associated with institutions of learning, and I've had a number of great teachers. Well, the nation is a wonderful institution of learning, and one of my great teachers has been Victor Navasky. I've learned from Victor through his writings, Kennedy Justice in particular, and naming names. But the most important thing has been Victor's presence in my life as an encouraging older intellectual. I don't really remember when I met Victor. I think I met him sometime in the 1970s. I don't remember the specific origins of our relationship. But the thing that I remember over and over and over again over these decades has been his presence as encouragement. He took me seriously. I remember, asking to write something for the nation, and him listening, and him reading what I wrote, and criticizing what I wrote, and encouraging more. And I just want to say that encouragement has meant a lot over these decades, and I want to express as powerfully as I can my gratitude for that. Thank you all very much.
Good evening. I'm Eric Foner. I'm an American historian, and for many years I served on the nation's editorial board alongside Victor and many, many others. I first wrote for the Nation back in 1977. The editor was Blair Clark. He didn't offer to pay me anything, actually. He said, I was a young assistant professor at the time. He said, oh, a line on your vita from mentioning the nation will be great for your career. Actually, the opposite proved to be the case. When Victor succeeded Clark, as editor, he decreed that authors would be paid now, and this was a step forward, although As Calvin Trillin has often said, Victor is a little bit parsimonious, I guess you might say. His concept of pay was, as Calvin said, in the high two figures. But that made me his lifelong friend. So I'm delighted to be here to pay tribute to Victor as a historian, as part of a long line of journalists in this country who have used their pens and their typewriters and their laptops to expose the ills of this society and to agitate for progressive change, and in the process, helping to establish the principle of a free press in the United States. Victor's forebears as journalists speaking truth to power go back all the way to the colonial era, when a jury here in New York acquitted John Peter Zenger, who was on trial for exposing the corruption, influence peddling, and overall tyranny of New York's government. Some things never don't change in this state. Then there was Tom Paine, who inspired support for American independence and for greater democracy in the new nation, including the abolition of slavery. Speaking of slavery, Victor is intellectually a descendant of the great abolitionist editor William Lloyd Garrison. In his first issue of The Liberator, his weekly anti-slavery magazine, Garrison wrote famously, "I will be as harsh as truth and uncompromising as justice. I will not equivocate, I will not excuse, and I will be heard." These words could easily have come from Victor Navasky. He has been heard all through his career. After the Civil War, Ida B. Wells, her journalism exposed the horror of lynching. We heard about Carrie McWilliams. Some of the previous editors of The Nation were also critical in the defense of freedom of the press. Oswald Garrison Villard, Carrie McWilliams, along with Victor and Katrina. As editor, as we heard, Victor was vehemently opposed to McCarthyism, proudly proclaiming himself a First Amendment absolutist. Oscar Wilde once said, "Any fool can make history. It takes a genius to write it." And rare indeed is the person who can do both, but Victor is one of those. He has made history and he has chronicled history. His books, Kennedy, Justice, and Naming Names, have stood the test of time. His book about political cartoons, The Art of Controversy, is also terrific. Victor, I hope you don't mind if I identify you not only as a journalist, but with that most honorable title, a historian. Long before anyone had heard of intersectionality, Victor made The Nation a clearinghouse for radical ideas of all kinds, linking in its pages the issues of racial justice, anti-imperialism, civil liberties, and gender equality, all with the goal of helping to make this a more equal, more just society. So happy birthday, Victor, and with many more birthdays to come.
Hi, everyone. Wow, I feel like almost I'm on a nation cruise. Anyone sitting at my table? I'm going to talk myself, and then I'm going to read a couple of lines from an old friend of mine who was a Nation intern also, Eric Etheridge from Mississippi. He's not here tonight, I don't think, so I'm not stepping on his lines. It's hard for me to talk about Victor and the Nation in public because it's like talking about my family. It's very close to the bone, and I think a lot of people here tonight feel that way. I grew up there at the Nation, and in so many ways, I am still living in that house. I got my first real-ish job at the Nation as a very low-paid person, no one will be surprised to hear, in the classified ad section. Victor was just taking over the reins of the magazine. I was about 2 years out of college. At the time, I thought the classifieds was a cruel assignment because I was almost biologically incapable of selling ads.
I realized Victor must have thought I was very stupid since I never brought in a penny, and he cared about pennies. However, recognizing my incompetence, he eventually put me into editorial at a low-paying level, and I became an assistant to the brilliant Elizabeth Pacoda, who was then the literary editor. Now, Elizabeth and Victor were not natural teachers. There was nothing fuzzy and warm about Betsy, and not too much fuzzy and warm about Victor either. They didn't say, "Here, dear, let me show you what to do." They were more likely to say, "Here, deal with this." and then you had to figure it out. We called the editors the men with beards because largely they were men with beards: Kai, Victor, Richard Lingaman at times. Even Betsy Pacoda, the beautiful, the elegant, was an honorary man with a beard. Under the misapprehension that Victor was awkward and hard to talk to, I never really tried, and we all, nation girls and boys, mostly interns, clustered around and listened and did his bidding, but never got the full blast of the man that has been discussed here tonight already. I learned by being told what to do and by watching. Meanwhile, though, Victor and Ham were making the nation into a vital part of New York's intellectual culture. What this meant to me was that we of the younger set at the magazine got to go to fabulous parties where real writers were drinking and talking also. We got to participate at very low wages in creating the incredible Writers' Congress in the early 80s, Victor's inspiration, where the public mingled with people like Kurt Vonnegut, Ed Doctorow, Ishmael Reed, Donald Barthelme, and Toni Morrison. In his opening remarks there, Victor said, "If there are not one or two walkouts, the normal number of fistfights, and an attempt at disruption, this Congress will be a disappointment." I realized at that moment that there must be more to him than had met my eyes during our already long acquaintance. But I had to get away from the nation to find out who Victor really was. There is a saying among people who've been caught in the infamous web of Victor Navasky's good jobs at low wages. The saying is, in order to leave the nation, you must leave the country. So I fled to France with another nation sufferer, Kate Manning, who is here tonight in spite of everything. And when we came back, we could do other things than stand around in the hallways at the nation offices wondering what Victor and his adjutants wanted us to do that day. The thing about Victor, though, and I'm sure Annie will agree, is that no matter where you are or what you're doing, you are always drawn back into the web. Once I grew up a little and was no longer subjected to him on a daily basis, Victor and I became friends and colleagues. And with the continuing support of Katrina and now Don, whom I would have to categorize as sort of groomers in the intellectual cult of Navasky, I was lured into becoming a contributing editor, which I still am and intend to remain until my dying day. I'm a lifer. One reason I'm so dedicated to the nation is that its editors have permitted me to write about Haiti the way I like to write about Haiti, and they have let me print more truth in one piece in the nation than the New York Times has allowed me to print in a lifetime of op-ed pieces. For this, I'm forever grateful. Also, I discovered, once we became fairly sociable together, that Victor was friendly, talkative, even voluble. And after a vodka or two at lunch, this was the old days, warm and funny and full of stories. One more thing. When I was first working at The Nation, I had a boyfriend who was working at the New Republic. Boo. He worked also at the Washington Monthly. Slight boo. I won't name him, but some of you know who he was. In those days, I would cry all the time because I wasn't a writer, but instead I was busy not selling classified ads. My boyfriend would say, "Why do you even work at The Nation? They are always making the same old argument," he would say. Where he worked, he claimed, the writing was politically counterintuitive. Basically, he was attacking the left for being monolithic and one-think. But what I realized about the left, as conceived of in Navasky world, was that it was divided, complicated, and, as Victor said, always ready for a fist fight. For a person whose politics are as deeply felt as his are, Victor was nonetheless always open to the world of ideas and controversy. At the time at The Nation, for example, there was Christopher Hitchens, a fist fighter if there ever was one. There was Katha Pollitt, another. And there was Alex Coburn. They all fought with each other about ideas and politics in The Nation's pages, as did many others, not all men with beards. Here's an emblematic image to leave you with about the time of Victor at the helm of the nation. In Victor's office, as Kai was saying, there was a large corkboard opposite his desk where we posted the names of stories that were going in the next week's magazine and the week after that and the week after that. This was the lineup. One day I walked into the editorial meeting and I looked over at the lineup for next week's issue and I saw a blue card on it, and it had a subject line I had often seen during the year, Khomeini. But underneath, as a subhead, it said, "We were wrong." I laughed, but it was serious too. This was a special community, I realized, one in which people fought hard for their beliefs, but were self-critical as well as critical of others, and were willing to admit when they'd gotten a story wrong, even very wrong. In other words, at the Nation, we didn't believe we were always right. We didn't believe one person, much less one idea, was the only idea. To put it plainly, we were not mainstream. Thank God. And happy birthday to Victor. But I just want to read a few lines from Eric Etheridge, who is my great friend and who drove us all to the Nation, keeping it alive through the transit strike of some year. I don't remember which one. Eric says, I learned so much about how to magazine from Victor in my 4 years there, 1980 to 1984. How to say no politely to slush pile submissions. Space constraints make your piece a luxury we can't afford. How to handle a writer's pitches in person. Victor said, make them say all their ideas before you start saying no, and don't use the word no. Best of all was the crazy, delicious crowd that swam in Victor's and the magazine's wake. Bill Rubin, where are you? Happy birthday, Victor, from Eric also.
Hello, I'm Calvin Trillin. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. I celebrate the birthday of my old friend Victor, also known as the wily and parsimonious Victor S. Navasky, or the old W&P. I might as well admit from the start that when Victor started the intern program, I used to refer to it as the slave study program. Many years ago, Victor and I played in a weekly basketball game in the village that ended with an awards banquet. And you could give any award, just up to you. It was ad hoc. For instance, one player always gave somebody the award of the Richard Nixon Award for the most specious out-of-bounds arguments. I always gave Victor the Most Improved Jewish Player Award. Victor claimed that he was on the second five of his high school basketball team. A claim that was not supported by his performance on the court. Then I finally figured out Victor had gone to the left-wing Elizabeth Irwin High School, and they tried to have a team of diversity. So they had like a Trotskyite forward and Shockmanite center. And Victor, who by then was collecting money from his classmates for affirmative stories in the school newspaper, was on the team as the token exploiter. I'm often asked if some of my conversations with Victor are true or not true. And I could clear up a couple of them tonight. Is it true that Monocle, which was Victor's editorship before The Nation, that Monocle had such a low pay scale that they actually sent me a bill for a piece that I once wrote? That is true. I would add to what Professor Foner said about the high two figures. when he offered me that for each column, I said, what do you mean by the high two figures? And he said, we've been paying 65, which seemed like the middle two figures to me. Also, I'm asked about a conversation a few months after I started doing the column when Victor said, what about these quotes? And I said, what quotes? And he said, did John Foster Dulles really say, you can't fool all the people all the time, but you might as well give it your best shot? I said, Victor, at these rates, you can't expect real quotes. Actually, I made up that conversation. A friend of mine told me not long ago that he had attended a 90th birthday party for somebody, and it was a lavish affair where they filled one of the ballrooms in one of those fancy hotels in Midtown. And the birthday boy, who was 90, got up and said, when it's time for his speech, they say that one of the problems of reaching this age is that your friends are gone. So who in the hell are you, all you people? Well, the answer for Victor is pretty simple. In the first place, he made a lot of new friends along the way. And also, he was fantastically loyal to his old friends. Even back before Elizabeth Irwin, when he went to that cockamamie grade school where you learned the alphabet by imitating the letters. So, I am a P, I am a P. That, and so at this point, I would like to offer, after a long period of silence, I'd like to offer again Victor the prize for the most improved Jewish player. Thank you.
Quick video came in the other day from someone who loves you, Edward Corin.
Victor, my old pal, my warrior of sword and pen, I wish you a happy birthday, a wonderful happy birthday, surrounded by all your pals, of which I am one, and I just wish I was there and could be there, but I'm doing this from remote and virtual. It's a virtual greeting, and I applaud you, admire you, loved what you've done all your life with great probity and incredible responsibility to the pen and the sword, and kinder, more forceful, more effective man of the pen, man of the sword I've never known. Happy birthday, Victor.
One of the things that comes through most in your book is what a high wire act it is to keep a magazine like The Nation going. What's the key to survival?
It is more a cause than a business.
More a cause.
More a cause than a business. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, on the one hand. On the other hand, if we weren't run like a business, I don't think we'd make it. And then thirdly, E.L. Guttenplan, who founded the magazine in 1865, had a formula. It's very low budget. The paper is newsprint paper, but it's not just because it's cheap, it's also a rebuke sort of to the Madison Avenue slickness of these magazines that have very high production costs and values, and that they get burdened with those costs and values, and eventually they become too much. The role is to give an independent perspective on what's going on. It's to question the official line. It's to monitor the major media. It's to publish information that you won't find in the major media, but basically it's to explain the underlying meaning of events in a way that the sort of convention of narrative neutrality in the mainstream media doesn't permit.
When I was asked to introduce my good friend E.L. Doctorow this evening, I was honored to be asked and said yes, because I have such admiration for his books, his plays, and his other writings, his short stories. But on reflection, it has occurred to me that Edgar has won more awards than are good for him.
The nation has been, as Katrina said, a fighter for equal rights, human rights, civil liberties. During the years of the bleakest years of a segregationist country, the nation was ahead of its time.
There are also very moving moments at the convention when Bobby Kennedy, after Jack Kennedy was assassinated, spoke and quoted Shakespeare, and they showed this film. It was heart-wrenching. And this one, you know, as I go around, one of the things that people say, and not just the delegates, but people sitting in the bar who have no connection to convention, they're Denver residents, they say, well, this is a historic convention. And you tend to forget it when you're covering the smallnesses and the little competitions. But yeah, to have an African-American nominee for the first time in the history of this country is history-making. And we'll look back and see how that expressed itself.
You said it caused them, and I quote, worry, depression, fatigue, fear, insomnia, drinking, headache, indigestion. It sounds like an Alka-Seltzer ad or something.
What I'm doing there, as you know, again, as to quote our new president, there, you've done it again, Roy. You know, what I'm doing there is quoting somebody else, as you know.
As
you'll see, it's within question.
I mean, you didn't put it in here because you disagree.
But what the whole tenor of these questions, I'll put it in quotes, seems to me is a kind of reflection of the attitude that pervaded that period. It's you cannot talk about witnesses before the Un-American Activities Committee investigation into Hollywood without dragging in Whittaker Chambers and Alger Hiss. You cannot talk about the American Communist Party without talking about an international espionage monolithic conspiracy. Haven't you learned that China and the Soviet Union are not part of an international monolithic conspiracy? That they don't like each other? That they don't like each other? In Mr. Cohen's
It wasn't Roy.
Well, for years we had a very bad joke. If it's good, if it's bad for the country, it's good for the nation, was our joke. So people say, how are you doing? I say, better than ever. We're in a lot of trouble, you know.
One of the facts about cartoons in the distant past is that a lot of people were illiterate, and that had to do with class. But they were not blind, and they could see images, and they could understand cartoons which have a language of their own. So that I think one of the reasons that everyone from King Philippe was upset with Daumier's and Philippon's caricatures of him as Le Poire, the pear, he knew the masses were seeing these things and were making judgments about him, right up until Boss Tweed, who famously said of Thomas Nast's cartoons, I don't care what they write about me, but get rid of those damn pictures.
Is it necessary when you talk about Stalin to talk about the Tsar? Is it necessary when you condemn the KGB to condemn the crimes of the Okhrana? It's reductio ad absurdum, and it is a diversionary request. And ultimately what it's designed to do is to take away from the basic question that this book asks, which is, what is there to be learned from the fact that during a time of trouble, hundreds of decent people did something which is indecent. Some resisted.
Okay, you say one word because we don't have too much to be.
And I think on a whole range of issues, including the problems posed by the atomic bomb, which the late Frieda Kirchwey identified as a critical issue, all of the arguments about the war in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, before we entered Iraq, that Katrina vanden Heuvel's nation were running, and Jonathan Schell's a combination of reporting and essay writing about this, as well as all the other people in the magazine, that's not the wrong side of history, I think, and I think we're learning that every day.
think you just saw the force of decency, Victor Navasky face down evil, seeping evil. So I'm here to introduce former intern Edward Miliband. He was labor leader in the UK, the youngest ever. He came to the Nation offices in, I believe, September 2016, and we were all sitting around, and Hillary Clinton's running a lousy campaign, but he's not going to win. And he looked at us, Edward did. He was off to a conference on referenda and Brexit and said, "You are very sanguine. You better look out at what's going on in the world." He's known for many things, but he was an intern in 1989. What's not known is the other intern who's not with us tonight, but is coming to New York, Nick Clegg, class of 1990, who is now Mark Zuckerberg's right-hand person at Metaverse. But Edward Miliband, welcome.
Greetings from London, and many, many happy returns to you, Victor, for your 90th birthday. I consider it an incredible honour to have the chance to contribute to this evening. I'm only sorry I can't be there in person. I shall be holding the UK government to account in Parliament. But I did want to speak to you because I had the amazing experience of being a Nation intern in 1989. That was 33 years ago. It was a very different time. The Berlin Wall was still standing. George H.W. Bush was President of the United States, and we thought how right-wing he was. Little did we know what would come later. Believe it or not, I was followed, I think, some years later by Nick Clegg, who was also a Nation intern. I consider it an honour that you chose me rather than him to speak to you tonight. He has his work cut out at Facebook working for Mark Zuckerberg. But for me, as a 19-year-old, that experience of being a Nation intern was an extraordinary introduction to journalism, to US politics, to global politics, and I formed lifelong friendships and people I'm still in touch with today, including Katrina and Don. But I also, Victor, learned lessons in leadership which served me very well in later life, and I learnt them from you. I learnt the lesson of integrity, your incredible integrity as the editor of the magazine, as its leader. You described running the Nation as being more a cause than a business, and that says so much about who you are. I learnt the lesson too of tolerance, because it was a broad church, the Nation, as we say in Britain, of radicals and liberals, the left and the centre-left. And you saw that debate and dialogue as healthy, and you oversaw it and managed it. I learnt the lesson too of humility. You know, I think the very striking thing about you as a leader, as an editor, is your lack of ego. You know, if you like, if I can put it this way, the anti-Trump, quiet authority in leadership. And then finally, and most importantly of all, the lesson of humanity, of your values. You were once asked in a television interview whether being on the left meant being on the wrong side of history. And you said if what it means is standing up for the dispossessed, then so be it. But I don't think that's the wrong side of history. I think that's being ahead of your time. And I think that says so much about you, that you were willing to stand up and do what was right, however popular or unpopular it was and is at the time. And that is such a lesson for us all. Victor, you are a shining beacon when it comes to journalism in the United States. You're a shining beacon with a reputation across the world. You have always been a man ahead of your time. I hope you have a fantastic evening tonight, and it is my absolute honour to wish you a happy 90th birthday.
Good evening. My name is Laila, Al-Arian. I'm a journalist based in Washington, D.C., and I'm the executive producer of an investigative documentary program on Al Jazeera English called Fault Lines. I was part of a group of young students and recent graduates that interned at The Nation 16 years ago. So picture this. It's 2006 and about to graduate from the Columbia School of Journalism. It's not exactly a good time to enter the field. Newspapers and magazines were laying people off on what seemed like a weekly basis. The industry still couldn't figure out what to do about the internet, which I don't think they've solved that problem yet. My classmates and I were applying widely for jobs, and I was fortunate enough to be in a position to choose between two opportunities: a staff job at a local newspaper in New Jersey that was looking for an Arabic speaker to cover the community there. This was just a few years after 9/11. Or an internship at The Nation magazine. Who gives up a job with benefits and perhaps a semblance of stability for an internship? Well, it wasn't just any internship. It was an internship at an institution that had shown courage and moral clarity at a time when few news organizations had. This was just 3 years after the disastrous and illegal war in Iraq. As major newspapers were issuing half-hearted apologies for helping sell the war to the American public, a war based on lies, deception, and fear, The Nation had been proven right and had attracted quite a large, loyal, and engaged readership for taking principled positions when few had been willing. I can't emphasize how lonely this position was and how much opposition like this was shut out of the mainstream discussion. This was a time before social media, and the major news organizations largely controlled the conversation. But The Nation was doing tremendous investigative work, and I felt so fortunate to take part in it as an intern. During my time there, I learned so much about research, reporting, writing, and fact-checking, getting to work with Alexander Coburn, A.L. Press, and Chris Hedges, among others. I used some of the lessons I took from that time in my work every day. As a young journalist, I wished that I had the opportunity to cover the biggest story of the time, the Iraq War. As a Nation intern, I got to do just that when I was selected to work with Chris Hedges on an investigation into the war based on interviews with 50 veterans who'd served in the war. They told us about war crimes they participated in or witnessed, and how the military's rules of engagement were constantly changing and did not protect Iraqi civilians. After our cover story, The Other War, was published in The Nation, we got a lot of interview requests from independent news organizations in the US like Democracy Now! Or from international outlets like the BBC. But it was met with resounding silence in the US. Yet more evidence that The Nation was committed to telling stories that few others were willing to tell. To give you a sense of how formative internships at The Nation are for young journalists just starting out in their careers, let me tell you about what some of the people in my cohort did since their time at The Nation. Paloma Esquivel, a reporter at the Los Angeles Times, was on a team that won 2 Pulitzers. Jonathan Blitzer is a staff writer at The New Yorker doing great work on immigration. Stan Alcorn worked on impactful investigations at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. Alex Jung regularly goes viral on Twitter for his amazing interviews with celebrities for New York Magazine. Ali Winston has won top journalism awards for investigating police misconduct and is working on a book. Alberto Morales has done some incredible advocacy work, including most recently with the Human Rights Campaign. This is just one of many, many years of Nation internship classes. I wanted to close by saying that I never had the fortune of taking a class with Victor Navasky at Columbia, but when I came to The Nation, I could see his influence everywhere. Happy birthday, Victor, and thank you for this incredible legacy.
Hi, my name is Zoya Qureshi, and I was an intern in the winter-spring cohort this past year. Being an intern at The Nation has really been a formative experience for me. It has shaped the things that I think about, it has shaped the kinds of conversations I have, it has shaped the way that I inhabit my day-to-day. Before being at the Nation, I was working full-time in an orthopedic surgery hospital, and I couldn't shake the sensation of feeling out of place. There are a lot of things that I loved about that job and about medicine in general. The built-in ability to be an advocate, the intensity that accompanies building trust in a vulnerable situation, the possibility of being part of the first line of help. But the one thing that job did not leave space for was taking a step back. I found that the more situations I was exposed to, the more that I wanted to zoom out. I wanted to talk about how the little problems that littered each shift in the hospital came to be. I wanted to talk about what their effects were, who they affected, how the cracks in medicine should not be seen as specific to the realm of healthcare so much as part of a larger dynamic between health and living. And then it hit me that sadly, what I was hoping for in my day-to-day, space for reflection, colleagues who would talk through issues with me, maybe even time to write about things that I was thinking about, might just be characteristics of a different career. And then it hit me that sadly, that career might just be journalism. Anyway, so here we are. I'm 24 and I'm having a reckoning about what I want to do with my life. I know, no one has ever heard that one before. But then I got to thinking about what kind of publication I hope to be a part of. I'd started reading The Nation in college and had freelanced for them a couple of times, and in my head it was the perfect fit. They make room in their coverage for questioning, even needling when necessary, and they seem open to radical ideas. Now, all I had to do was convince them that I, someone who had never studied journalism, or been on a school paper, or even wrote more than 3 articles in my life total, would make the ideal intern. Somehow, they let me in, and I'm so grateful. Everyone at the Nation has been really wonderful. I love my entire cohort. Even though we no longer work together, I'd still consider them friends. Sophie, Najwa, Lily, and Adesh are so insanely intelligent, intimidatingly so, and yet they were so wonderful about the million questions that I had at every check-in, especially at the beginning. I learned as much from them as I did from my program, and I can't wait to keep reading their stories. The senior editors were also so sincere and helpful. They had our backs when writers got annoyed at us about fact checks, and they made themselves available for us to pick their brains. Maybe the luckiest bit was that I had the most amazing boss, Sam Schuyler, who quite literally held my hand through it. She taught me how to fact check, explain what goes into editing an article. She was there to talk through pitches whenever me or anyone in my cohort had an idea we were excited about. She was genuinely so warm and kind and really helped me grow into, dare I say, a journalist. Today, I'm working as an assistant editor for the Science, Health, and Technology sections at The Atlantic. And there's no way I would have made it here or even into journalism at all if it wasn't for this internship and all of the amazing people who allowed me to be here and helped me foster my growth along the way. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Chris and Peter and Julian and Victor. Thank you for making this all happen. I hope you have a really sweet birthday.
Hi, I'm Richard Kim. I am the editor-in-chief of The City. We are a new nonprofit newsroom covering New York City for New Yorkers. That's www.thecity.nyc. And before that, I was executive editor of HuffPost. And before that, I spent 20+ years, off and on, mostly on, at The Nation, holding just about every job from executive editor to intern. In fact, I was Victor's intern in the summer of 1997, and I think it's finally safe to say this now, I was a really bad intern. I missed every deadline, I didn't understand assignments, but somehow, and this is sort of a theme of speakers tonight perhaps, I'm still here. They took a chance on me. So happy birthday, Victor. 20 years is a long time, even for Victor. Am I the only one making age jokes tonight? You've disappointed me, Calvin Trillin. By my count, in all that time, I've had the fortune to work alongside, get ready for this number, 541 Nation interns. That's a fact. The Nation interns can check it. 541. What that makes me besides old, sorry, that made sense last night when I wrote this, but now I'm here and look at the room. What that makes me besides extremely middle age is extremely, extremely annoying to my colleagues. I am always yammering on and on about this former nation intern that, this former nation intern did this. And you don't have to take my word for how annoying I am. You can just ask my colleague Alyssa Katz at www.thecity.nyc, who is here in the audience. And by the way, did you know that Alyssa is a former nation intern? It's true. On any given day, since I left the nation, I'm randomly interjecting into editorial meetings. Things like, I don't always agree with that New Yorker columnist covering New York City, but I think he's pretty smart. Oh, and did you know that he's a former nation intern? Did you know that the first ever Pulitzer Prize for audio reporting went to a former nation intern? Damn, that amazing labor reporter who beat us and everyone else to that scoop. Well, did you know he was a former nation intern? You know that healthcare reporter who did the hands down the best work covering COVID and the healthcare crisis? Well, the New York Times just poached her. Oh, and by the way, she's a former nation intern. I was just on this panel with EICs of digital newsrooms, and you know what? Fully half the panel were former nation interns. That New Yorker culture critic who always finds something fresh and smart to say about what's trending, she's a former nation intern. That hellishly upstart website making a splash on the New York journalism scene, did you know that it was founded by a former nation intern? Did you know that the Marshall Project reporter who won the Polk Award for justice reporting is a former nation intern? Did you read that Me Too scoop in New York Magazine that blew up Twitter? It was written by a former nation intern. That podcast about the conservative movement that everyone is listening to, yeah, that's hosted by a former nation intern. Oh my God, that story that just ran in Esquire about trans bodies and trans experience, well, a former nation intern wrote that. I was just meeting with our partners at ProPublica, and did you know that there are half a dozen former nation interns there working as reporters and researchers? Did you know that the great investigative series about solitary confinement in New York City and Rikers was written by a former nation intern? Am I annoying you yet? I have about 527 more nation interns to go. Peter said I need to keep this to 4 minutes. The truth is that you could curate your daily reading diet by just reading bylines written by former nation interns, and you'd have a pretty good daily, rich and incisive trove of news, politics, opinion, essays, and criticism. And the program has made its mark beyond journalism. Every month, I run into former nation interns who are pioneering new forms of organizing, negotiating Senate deals, representing indigent clients pro bono, writing amazing novels, selling out concerts, scripting hysterical TV shows. In my field, however, the intern program has been an engine for diversifying the industry. Long, long before it was popular and a necessary thing to do, it was a right and difficult thing to do. And I'm indebted, my entire career is indebted to that fact, to the Nation Intern Program for building that legacy. So thank you for coming here tonight to make sure this legacy endures. Thank you, Victor. And cheers to the next generation, to the next 541 nation interns and more.
Hello, I'm Don Guttenplan, and I'm a former Nation intern. And Kai Bird, who picked my application out of the slush pile in the summer of 1979. Thank you, Kai, otherwise I wouldn't be here. Victor's corkboard. Let's talk about Victor's corkboard for those who remember it. I think about it a lot, particularly now when I look at my Trello, which is a poor electronic approximation of the magisterial corkboard that used to be behind Victor's desk, where you would see these 3x5 cards, blue, sometimes yellow. There was some color coding thing going on. I never quite figured that out. All I know is that at some point at the end of my summer, Betsy Pacoda, who was literary editor, Betsy, if you're here, thank you, commissioned a piece for me, and my name was on that corkboard. Now, I got paid $50 for that piece. I don't still have the check, but I still have a photocopy of the check. Anyway, so it is a great pleasure to be here and to celebrate Victor and to celebrate all of the interns. I particularly, Zoya, it's fabulous to see you, and it's fabulous to see you in person. So for those of you who may not be aware, we've been remote since March 2020. So a lot of people I'm seeing tonight I haven't seen in 2 years. And some people I'm seeing tonight I used to see every day on the screen, but never in person. So only for you, Victor, would we all come together like this. And thank you so much for giving us the chance to do it and to celebrate you. There are a lot of things about the internship program that have changed over the last 40 years, not least the fact that we now, well, when the internship program was named the Victor S. Navasky internship, interns got paid minimum wage. And that was a huge step up. In my day, as I bore the interns every year, we got paid nothing. And I remember, a little bit like you, Laila, having to choose between this internship. I'd been working since I was 13, delivering papers, the Hollywood Sun-Tatler. I'd had lots of jobs. I'd washed dishes, I'd brushed tables, I'd cooked at McDonald's. I'd never had a job where they didn't pay you. And I didn't understand Kai's letter. So I had to ask a friend of mine who was more familiar with the ways of the American upper middle class what this internship thing was. And he said, if you can afford to do it, do it. So I came to New York. I was in graduate school in England, but I had friends in New York whose couch I could sleep on. I got a hack license so I could drive a cab, so I could actually eat. And then, thanks to driving a cab on weekends, I got to hang out with Victor and Kai and Betsy and Amy. And that was paradise. Victor was not warm and fuzzy. In fact, he was remote and scary. And as I said to one of your daughters tonight, I remember going to Shiva for your father at your apartment. That's the first time I met Annie. And it was the first time I was with you and I wasn't terrified. Interns were basically terrified all the time of Victor. And he ruled through this kind of chemical communication rather than telling you things. Or maybe if you were lucky like Amy, you got a, here, deal with this. What I got was the history of the nation's foreign policy coverage. I was told to read it all and then write a memo. And that's what I spent my summer doing, reading it and writing a memo, which I think made no impact on anyone, except that now I'm actually in a position to do something about it. So maybe we'll improve our foreign policy coverage. Anyway, I want to say something about, two things about Victor that you may not know. One, I learned from Ed Miliband, whom I remember as an intern, meeting across Andy Kopkind's kitchen table in Vermont and talking about British politics. So it was kind of amazing to see Eddie, as we called him then, become a practitioner of British politics. Anyway, he told me, and I thought it was going to be part of his tribute, but since it isn't, I'm going to share it with you. And Victor, you can confirm or deny this, that you once got Babe Ruth's autograph. Is that actually true? Annie's shaking her head. I think we can take that. What do you think, fact checkers? Will we take secondhand confirmation on that? Good. So I never knew that I was in the presence of somebody who'd been in the presence of Babe Ruth. I think for me that's thrilling. Another thing you may not know about Victor, we share two things in addition to our deep love of the nation. One is a deep love of Sidney Morgenbesser, who was also my teacher, and who I think was one of the reasons that Victor deigned to talk to me, because I'd also been a student of Sidney's. The other is that Victor, and this may be deeply unfashionable now, so I'm sorry for outing you this way, Victor, is a serious fan of the sweet science. And Victor knows an immense amount about boxing. And there's a thing that he shares in a way, or he reminds me, well, they used to say that Muhammad Ali could knock you out while going backwards. In other words, going away from you, he could still knock you out. And What Victor is capable of doing is flattering you even as he turns you down. So I remember in the summer of 1984, which is to say 5 years after I was a Nation intern, I submitted a piece for the front of the book. It was the Mets had just let Tom Seaver go to the White Sox, and I thought this was outrageous. Even though I wasn't a Mets fan, I was a Seaver fan. And so I wrote a piece called Saving the Game, calling for the nationalization of the national pastime. And I thought it was pretty funny. And I sent it in to Victor. And he sent me a note. It was one of those 3x5 cards, signed Vic at the bottom. And he said, "This piece is too Marxist for the Nation. Why don't you try the New York Times?" I don't have the piece anymore, but I still have the 3x5 card. Anyway, a little bit about ulterior motives. When I asked Victor if we could throw a 90th birthday party for him, he knew that I wanted to, that it would be a chance to ask you all for some money. And I knew that he knew that. Because after all, I.F. Stone, as I'm sure you all know, threw himself a 65th birthday party to raise money. So the idea was around on the left. Anyway, it is a delight to see so many of you here tonight. It's a delight to see so many familiar and unfamiliar faces. When we're in the eating and drinking portion of the evening, if you haven't already, please come up and say hello, particularly if you're a member of the 1979 cohort, the few, the proud, the obscure. That was my year. We are hoping to raise, it says here $90,000. I think that's a little meager, really. We were hoping to raise more than $90,000, but we're hoping to raise at least $90,000. Now, the first time I met Sidney Morgenbesser was at a Columbia benefit, and they were trying to raise money, and they brought all the scholarship boys in and had us give a little talk about what we were doing. And Sidney, who was sitting across the table from me and whom I'd never met, said, "Why don't they do this like the UJA? Who'll give $1,000? So we're not going to do that tonight. On the other hand, we will take checks, cash, Bitcoin. We would love to have you help us reach our goal by texting Victor, that's V-I-C-T-O-R, Victor, to 707070, or making a check out to the Nation Fund. And my colleagues will be at the doorway, should you have brought your checkbook. Peter, do we take credit cards? Yes. We take credit cards. Bless you, Sarah Burke. We take credit cards, too. Anyway, so thank you so much for your support for this program, which I truly believe is one of the finest programs for early career journalists in the country. And before we go, if any of you, all of those of you in this room who are former Nation interns, would you please stand up? I don't mean to be presumptuous, Victor and Annie, but we are all in some ways your children. So thank you so much for this. Katrina? I think we have something to announce.
First of all, I want to thank Peter Rothberg, Sarah Berg, Gia, the Nation team for being so extraordinary in putting this together. But I also want to... So Victor, Brad Lander, who I believe you know, the New York City controller, friend of your daughter, someone who's come to the Nation many times, could not be here tonight, but he has sent you a proclamation.
A proclamation.
And I just want to read it very quickly. For 90 years of unparalleled dedication to telling the truth through journalism, for his charming, witty, and consistently entertaining writing, for being an incomparable steward of the Nation, magazine, for the love he has for his craft that can only be recognized as a calling, and for being an editor whom journalists would kill to work for, paren, even while calling him wily and parsimonious, end paren, semicolon, and for his incomparable legacy and contributions to the city of New York. Brad Lander. Yay. Can we give you a mic? We want to give you a mic, Victor.
Yeah, we want to give you a mic.
Here we go.
Here's a mic.
Victor?
Annie? There you go.
Here, no. Oh, can you stand up? I don't know. Okay.
After many decades of working at the nation, more than I care to remember, I am deeply moved by what I heard from Randall Kennedy and Eric Foner and Amy Wilentz and Calvin Trillin's defamatory remarks. But having said that, and by Kai Bird earlier this evening and many others, I was promised that as a birthday present to me, I didn't have to make a speech, so I'm not going to. I'm speechless, but I want to thank all of you who have spoken, all of you who are here, all of you who subscribe, and all of you who care about what's happening to this country. Thank you very much.
Three cheers for Victor! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray!
I'll add only I don't recognize the Victor Navasky that they were talking about.
So our ulterior motive in gathering tonight, since the external motive is to raise some money, is to show you and to let you know how much we love you. So Victor, Katrina, we are here to say we love you. Happy birthday. And now we will...
Drink. Join us. Happy birthday